All right, we're going to take a little introduction to XML. It's meant to add on to the reading and study you've been doing in class, and maybe it stands alone as an exposure. For data management, you need to be familiar with the XML, what it looks like, how it enables transfer and storage of data. We won't be going deep, even as you might be relieved to find as SQL or SQL in terms of becoming developers, but we're going to do a little bit with it because it is another fundamental concept, and it's kind of everywhere, but often hidden. So a little bit more on that later. So XML, as you probably know, is Extensible Markup Language, is what the abbreviation means. So let's unpack that a little bit. This language part is talking about text representing code. Everything that developers do is really fundamentally text. When they write in C# or C or write scripts in Bash or Python, write HTML pages, style sheets, JavaScript, you name it, PowerShell. They're really text files, and the text files get processed and interpreted, where they, when applied, the browser interprets HTML and knows how to present it. C# compiler recognizes a C# text and turns it into, object code that can then become a program. So the text it represents something that has an underlying syntax. There's the notion of being well formed. So just because it's text, doesn't mean random, characters are going to do anything. There's a structure and a syntax, and the same is true with XML. But that's when we talk about being a language in this sense, not a language in terms of English or Chinese or Spanish or something that communicates thoughts or what a language does. But I think we knew that. But the idea there is this notion of kind of well formed. Legal, if you, in a sense. When we talk about a markup language, we're talking about something that combines content, like data or what we're trying to get across, and tags that usually maybe describe what this data is, maybe delimit it in some way that, this is the data and this isn't, and define what's going on. And probably the best way to show that rather than just say it and pass is look at HTML. Probably if you ask for a common person, can you name a markup language, they might dig deep and say, well, it's an HTML, it's hypertext markup language, and they'd be right. So here's an HTML file. We can pass it. We shortly will to a browser that will not show all this. This is looking at the text in Notepad. It will render it in a browser, and it will be, if not pretty, at least we won't see things. But it's a combination of tags. And when we talk about a tag in a language, we're talking about a name, usually in these braces or brackets, and XML follows that. And so, this tag says, oh, here comes some HTML. It's not intended that that word HTML be presented. It's telling whoever's going to do the processing of this that this is where my HTML begins, and the /HTML is where the HTML ends. And within tags, you can have other tags. We have a head tag, and there's its end, and a body tag, and its end. And so the tags are these things, and the tag and what's in the middle, it's called an element, right? So there's an HTML element. It's the root element. It's where it starts and ends. Within that, there's a head element. And in this particular HTML, there's a title element. And we got to our first data. This says I'd like the title for the page, the thing that appears up in the tab, to be demo web page. And so how does it know, that? And then when it sees this, okay, I'm done telling you about the title now. And now, by the way, I'm done with the header. In big web pages, there's lots more that maybe goes in the head section. And then there's a body tag, okay, and it says this is the stuff that's going to appear on the web page. In this particular web page, the body element has sub-elements. H2 is like a second level header that comes out as demo web page. And again, the H2 won't appear, but demo web page will, and it'll come out in whatever format is defined kind of at that time by default style sheets, or if we applied a style sheet for an H2 heading. But that's just understood to be HTML. P is a paragraph tag, so this will appear in a paragraph, and it'll break if it's long enough, like a paragraph ought to, a beginning and end. And then I've got a button tag. sometimes in a markup language, in addition to these, tags that define elements, elements can have attributes. So I did want to have something that had an attribute. So this button tag has an attribute called onClick, and the onClick, the value of the attribute in quotes is this. It happens to be JavaScript, and what it'll do is alert, or have a little pop-up that says thanks for clicking. The button's going to say click me, and that ends the button. So getting good with all this is learning HTML, but the takeaway for us here is, okay, it's a markup language. These tags mean something. Okay, and that's, you do research to find that out, and the stuff inside is our content that we're adding in. So if I go here and now open that in, say, Microsoft Edge, we get a demo web page. The fact that it says demo web page up here is because I put that in the title. That's that paragraph, click me, and thanks for clicking. So it does something here. We don't see the tags, we see the result, and the result is that combination of a text file, but done with tags and markup according to the HTML standard. And Microsoft Edge knew enough about that standard that when it saw the web page, it said, oh, let me show it to you. And on all web pages, there's this, well, in all web browsers, there's the ability to say, oh, well, I'd like to really see the page source. And it will show you, okay, this is what I got. This is what you see, right? So that's that concept of markup, and in one particular case, how it works, probably the most common case, all right? But XML is a markup language, has tags with content. A little different about XML than, say, HTML is the developer can freely create new tags and have some idea about the meaning. They still have to be well-formed, tags within tags, attributes with quotes, and all the rules that you can read about in the textbook or other studies. And that's good, because sometimes we'd like to, we have a data situation that requires some special purpose nomenclature to gen up. It can be a little bad because, well, there's nothing to keep us from creating bad tags, but that's where something called an XML schema comes into play. We'll see how that works shortly. The schema can say, okay, this HTML, it's maybe well formed, but you're using a tag you didn't tell me ahead of time about, so I'm going to warn you that you're stepping out of the rules that you made up in the schema, even though it fits the rules of XML in general. Okay. XML in general, as long as the tags and attributes are well formed, it is XML. It's everywhere, typically hidden. When you go to a page, you see your stock results on a table. There's something like your bank checkout items. Probably that data was transferred behind the scenes to the web page in XML. All over the web are places to download data in XML. This happens to be lottery data, and it's saying it doesn't have a style. Okay, you read about style sheets. It didn't have anything that suggested how to format it, so it's really just showing the document tree. And you might know enough about that to say, okay, there's a root element called response, and when I click on that, what it does is close up. It says, okay, there's response, some stuff, and then a close response in this one. Then there's this element called row, and a row has a sub-element called a row ID. It's got an element called a draw date, a winning number, and blah blah like that. Okay, so this is XML format. We could write tools against it. Maybe if you're thinking that maybe I can statistically analyze this and find out which numbers are coming up more often. Maybe there's a bias in the random number generator or something like that. That's good stuff. But the idea is that this is now transportable. I could take this data and run with it and tool against it using XML, but I'm making the point that it's kind of everywhere. One other sort of little hand wave second to the last is here we are in SQL Server, and I want to use this database that I created. if you haven't already, Northwind database is a database that's got customers and transactions and products, and here's a select statement for it, and we can say, oh, we've got a customer ID, and the customers have a name, and they made an order on a particular date for a product at a price and a quantity, and so there was a total for the line, and it turns out maybe these three things are all part of the same order. Okay, so it's data, and we're used to kind of seeing it in this tabular, almost comma separated value format. In fact, this would be very easy to save as this another format, comma separated values, like a table. We'll be looking at that shortly, but built into SQL Server is this idea that, oh, I can extract that, but I want it in XML format. And there's some different ways you can do this. So just taking that same data, and now it's looking at it as, okay, it's data and it's got a structure. So it made up the tags. I told it to make this the root. It says, oh, I see a customers. That's the name of a table it's coming from. They've got some attributes like their ID and some name and a date they made the order. Within that customer, there was products they ordered. So there's a product with the product name and an order detail. It's got its attributes. So it's maybe not the hierarchical structure that we'd want. You could control that. But the point is, XML is so important that when you have data coming out of a database, sometimes you'd like to automatically, well, I want it in XML format so I can transport it somewhere. And SQL Server makes that easy with that extra tag. My last little argument, the ubiquity, it's everywhere. I've got a spreadsheet here, nothing too dramatic, a grocery list, milk and quantity and a price and blah, 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 formula here, formula there, data. Okay, nothing too dramatic. If you haven't seen this trick before, it's kind of fun the first time you do it, maybe the second. You might think that, oh, an Excel file is it's just warning me if I change an extension, it might become unusable. An Excel file is some kind of binary format that Microsoft manages and like that. Well, it's not. It's really a zipped, an archive, a manifest. If I change the extension to zip, and then if I double click on that, what you're going to find is that an Excel file is really a collection, a set of XML files. If I kind of dive down, you just see all these things. XML, I think the workbook one, no, not the workbook one. Yeah, it's popping it up and it's trying to show me in a way. Is it worksheets? Yeah, sheet 1 XML. This one, if you kind of look, I got row 1 and I got a column and I can see these values that I placed in there and some, so it's keeping track of the formula I put in. So fundamentally, an Excel file is really this manifest collection of XML files, because XML is just a nice way and a toolable way to transfer the data. Now, we never bother to see that, thank goodness. We just kind of go and roll with it. But I was just showing in a few ways, off the top, that it's everywhere, but typically hidden. And it's great for structured data transfer and storage. We kind of saw that in the SQL, and even to an extent in that downloading the lottery data. It is an open standard, so it's not something that somebody is proprietary. There's proprietary tools and frameworks, and many of those, but they work on that open standard, maybe some extensions. And at the bottom, they're really just text files. You can open them up in Notepad and type them. It's nice to be in a tool or a framework that helps guide you, right? And say, this isn't well formed and anything like that. Getting good at XML system with style sheets and schemas and lots of data updates and create, update, and delete is work. Takes training. There's people who do it, and it's a great area. We're not after that. We're after an understanding and a little bit of manipulation that I'm going to kind of get into now. A task that you have on one of your assignments. I haven't written out the assignment as I'm doing this video, but by the time you get the video, the assignment will be finished. But in the Watson textbook, he does an example with a CD library. So we're going to recreate that CD library using some of the files from that a particular chapter. So that's some things in the web. But what I want to do is kind of segue now and show you a tool for working with XML, and then how to set up Watson's, the author's project, in XML. So I'm in the course VM, and we're going to use something called Visual Studio. If you have maybe a computer science or an IT background, you're familiar with Visual Studio. What it is a comprehensive developer tool set developed by Microsoft for helping to create, organize, and develop almost every conceivable development project you might think. Big websites, database applications, combinations of those. We're going to use it to kind of deploy and work with this example from the textbook. I don't want to pretend that you need Visual Studio to work with XML. You don't, and there are other tools, but it's a tool that's handy for us. It also, we're just using a small part of it, so don't get overwhelmed by, gosh, I got a gazillion menu options. We only need to use a few. But when you double-click on Visual Studio, it either is trying to let you open a recent one, find a project, but what we're going to do first time in is create a new project. So I've got doing create a new project, and the kind of project I want to create, it has different project types. If you're building a particular whatever a Blazor server app is, it has a lot of infrastructure and that kind of thing that goes along with it. We're going to create a simple project that doesn't really need any infrastructure. So I typed blank, up came blank solution. You won't have this the first time in. It's because I was practicing earlier. But I can highlight that and click Next. And then it's going to ask about the name for the solution, which I'd like you to make CD library. That will let me look at it out there in the VM, also a better name than Solution 1. And importantly, I'd like you to, I'm clicking on this and using Documents to put that CD library in your Documents folder up on the VM. What that's going to do is create this folder within Documents to hold all the assets for this project, in case you want to go look at them in the file system. So changing the name and the location and saying create, it trundles a while, it's creating that folder, and now we're up in Visual Studio. And what we want to do is get the example files from the author system set up here. And so a way I suggest you do that, and I've got that documentation you can look at to go by, is I've right-clicked up on the solution, and what we want to do is add a new item to this solution. A new item is really going to be a file, and what kind of thing we want to add is an HTML file. An XML file, right? It's going to suggest the name XML file 1. I suggest CD lib. You can always rename these if you don't get the name right, but this just says add a file, a new file called CD lib XML. And so what we got is a starting point, and you're not going to type anything here. I'm going to show you shortly how to get the author stuff in here, but when I say you have an XML tool, I typed trans, bracket, trans, bracket, and since I was in an XML file, Visual Studio says, well, if you're doing XML, you're going to have an end tag for trans, and if I start with LM, I'm going to have an end for that, and so when I say a tool, it helps you do it took a while. I was trying to do, see how when I take out the ending tag for sub-elem from in here, well, I'm getting all kinds of squiggles because it's no longer well-formed XML. So I was trying to get the point when we talk about an XML tool, it is watching me and saying, okay, you're kind of violating XML well-formed. I could type all this in Notepad and it would never burp about what I typed. And maybe when I tried to process it as XML, we'd get a burp there. But it's something that's sensitive to XML. Well, how do we get the author's example in here, well, I've extracted from his chapter the XML, the schema, and the style sheet that the author talks about. Read the chapter for a background. What the heck are these and that kind of thing. But when you take the click, that it opens up in a window. This is the XML. What I do is click in the window here, do Control A, highlight it all, Control C to put it in your clipboard. Get back to this, click in the XML data here, do Control A to highlight what's there and Control V. Then that just pastes in the author's XML. I'm going to click the Save button just to save that all. But that just gets that author's XML. It's now called CD Live XML, and it's part of our project. Okay, and we're going to do that then with the doing Add New Item with the schema and the style sheet, XSLT. So I'll do the schema next. I'm saying I did File, New. I want to create I right-clicked Add New Item and chose Excel Schema. Yeah, it's nice if you think about it at the time to change it here. You can always right-click and rename if you get it wrong or something. And so I'm going to add that CD Live XSD. The thing about a schema, Visual Studio is trying to help us out, so it's kind of got this design palette that we can work with. What we want to do to be able to paste the actual underlying XML schema is click that. Now we can see, okay, that's kind of the default schema we get. How do we get the schema that the author wanted us to use or had developed? Well, if I click on that link, I get a window, Control A, Control C. That gets it in the clipboard. Go back here, Control A and Control V. Paste in the schema, and I can save it while I'm here too. One thing that you might notice, back to the data, that this had a little tag that an attribute, right? An attribute that said, oh, my schema is CD Live exe. I could have pointed it out before I got here. Well, let me try this. There, but suppose I called it the wrong thing. All right, notice I'm getting this little thing here. So it's saying, oh, the schema, the data organization rules for this particular XML, you'll find them here. Okay, but it's not, so you get in the squiggle that says there is no schema being applied. If you named it correctly, then get back into the data, that goes away. It says, oh, I got it. Notice down here it is properties for the XML file. That's how it knew that this ought to be in here down is the schema. It's CD Live XSD modulo capitalization. Nice thing in a Windows environment, capitalization doesn't matter. In a Linux environment, it does. Okay, so that got the schema in. Let's go ahead and get the style sheet just while I'm doing this kind of thing. So I'm going to do, not right-click, you right-click on the solution. Right-click on the solution, add new item. And we want an XSLT file. I would call it CD Live. Okay, and add. And as we've done before, let's go get the authors. Do Control A, Control V to overwrite the one that was there. And this saves all the files. It's a nice thing to do if you're not too sure. Okay, so there we have the setup. We got to do one more little thing. There is a way to put a tag here that tells this XML file what its style sheet is. One thing we can do is when we're clicked into the XML is come over here, and we could either search for it or put it there. And now it understands that that style sheet, I don't know if we need to save after that or not. Okay, so we have data. We have style sheet. Let's start taking a look at the data. And the author describes it in some detail. We have a root element. It's called CD library, and we have elements that are CDs in there. The author has 2 different CDs. CDs have some information, IDs, labels, titles, years, and then they have multiple elements for all the tracks on the CD. Okay, it's showing 2 there and on. So it's XML. It takes maybe a little getting used to looking at it, but it's not that hard to understand. Okay, it's something you can wrap your mind around. It gets a little verbose, and it's hard to see, gosh, if it went too many layers deep, then it might be a little bit harder, and it's not hard to see how we might update this. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and try something here. Suppose I wanted to add a CD genre and say this guy, both of his examples are jazz. Notice I'm getting a squiggle here, and that squiggle says the element CD has child element CD. It's saying I don't see CD genre as an allowable thing. Well, I thought XML was extensible, but if I tried to extend it and add CD genre, I'm getting a little error. And that's because in the schema, all right, and now if we kind of look at the schema, we're getting a couple of things, that the CD library is a sequence of things that have this CD type. Okay, so, and the CD type is a thing that has a CD ID, a CD label, a title, a year, and then it has a sequence of things called with this track type, and a track type has a track number, track title, track length. So it's basically saying, even though XML is extensible in general, since you've applied a schema, I'm not going to blow up or shut down the computer or anything, but I'm going to warn you, you don't have a CD genre as part of what you are defining for the schema. Kind of got to do it in the XSD. I might even close this design window. We're not going to use. There is some drag and drop kinds of things there. So if we wanted CD genre to be something that was allowed by the schema, then we have to add it into the schema. And we're not going to get good at schemas, but we're going to do a little bit. One of the cool things about an XML schema is it's written in XML itself. A schema is just an XML file, okay, with a top element that's kind of got an XSD schema as its name. This is kind of a namespace name kind of thing, but it's a valid name. And so these elements are all part of a schema definition, but it itself is, it's got an element definition here, it's got a complex type definition there, and so an XML schema is itself a schema. What I'm going to do is come down here because I wanted to add, and I'm just really aping what I see here rather than saying, oh gosh, I've had 17 years of XML experience to let me do. I'm looking back up at, a genre would be something like a title. It's string. We could, if we were really, a string is going to be enough for us. And notice that we get some help here. We wouldn't get this if we were, and these are all the XSD types, if we were just typing it in Notepad, and that's a nice thing of going. We could, if we were really into it, define genres. So you have jazz, you have rock, you have pop, you have rap, and whatever. And then it would require the value to be one of those, or otherwise it would violate the schema, going way too deep. But the idea is I've updated, and I think I might have to save it. I'm going to save everything just in case. But I've updated the schema to include, now I'm not getting a squiggle under CD genre. Notice I am getting a squiggle down here because it's saying, well, I was expecting a CD genre before this. There's probably a way, I have no doubt, to say maybe it's optional. Don't worry if it's not there. We're going to stick with, they're either all there or not. So what I have to do in the data to make the squiggle go away, that's kind of more of a warning, is notice now I just started typing and it came up and suggested that CD genre that I wanted, and this one is jazz as well. Okay, so that's a little bit how the schema then is controlling what I can put in. And like I said, it doesn't throw an error message, though you could write a process that if you're trying to accept a file, like upload a file and wait a minute, it doesn't obey the schema, fix it and send it back up. All right, so it's a little bit about a schema, how to update it, so you can maybe make it a little richer explanation of what's going on in the XML. Let's take a look at the style sheet. You know what a style sheet is written in? XML. The root element is the XML style sheet element, and we have other elements that describe what's going on. This particular style sheet, if we look at it, it kind of says, almost start your output here. And what it's outputting is an HTML tag. And ahead, and we've seen this title, complete list of songs. We've seen this kind of thing. Oh, it's starting to write a web page whose title is complete list of songs. Now it's getting into a body. It's using the H1 level of header and saying H1. And then it kind of says something about apply templates, but then we got the close body and close HTML. So this is a template. And what that template says is, well, start writing the page, but when you get here, go down to this thing called CD library and do what it says here. And it's doing kind of a for each. That means go get each CD. We're going to have this means a line break in HTML. We're going to turn the font color maroon, and we're going to put the title, then a comma. Even though these appear on separate lines, we'll see when we run it, it's going to, they'll appear, out to the right, just because, just because they're on different lines here. When they're rendered as HTML, there's nothing that says to make a line break, but it's going to be the title, then a comma, then a label, then a comma, then a year, then a bracket, and then the CD ID, and then a bracket, and that font closes this, and then it starts a table, and in the table it's going to set up the table, but for each track then on that CD, it's going to put a row in the table that shows the track number, the track title, and the track length, and then we close off the table when we do this. So we have something that is a combination of HTML styling and extracting from the data, all this kind of stuff. It's called XPath statements or XQuery. It queries into the XML to see what's going on. So just the way to then apply the selected style sheet to the data is, I guess you have to get in the data. I guess maybe it will do it from anywhere. I've always done it from the data. But if you do XML and start XSLT without debugging, what that says is take the data, look at the style sheet, and then do what the style sheet says. And as we say, we got complete list of songs. I guess we don't have the header here. It's not really, it's just rendering what the HTML looks like. And this is maroon. We had all this stuff that it did, the ID. Anyway, it's rendering it in HTML. Well, what if we wanted this style to now we've added genre, right, to the data? What if we wanted to add genre to the presentation? So I'm looking at this here, and I'm trying to think of where I might like it. I can either maybe do it out to the right here is probably the easiest and sufficient. Or maybe we want it on the line below. And we can do it both ways because we have to put and that's a problem, our HTML hat on to do that. To just get that out on the right, I'm looking at this, here's this closed bracket, and in the style sheet, that's where that closed bracket's coming. And I'm in the maroon font color here. If I just put space, and then using, again, not that I've been trained in in XML, but I can see what they did for CD ID and everything like this. So let me just see if that runs. I don't think I need the space there, but they all have some spaces going on there. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to close that window. I think it might have stayed open, but now if I do XML and okay, that's interesting. I guess you do have to be in the XML file. If you start here, it wants to put it in an output file, but here it'll put it in another window. Okay, and so there it is. I'm getting the genre out to the side. I'll maybe do one last little bit. Ignore the cat. She is not abused, and she's going to get fed fairly shortly, but she's coming in. If I wanted just to say kind of, oh, here comes the genre for that thing, then I could put that in the XSLT, and then when I XML and view without debugging, there we go. So we've shown a little bit about how to set up a project with some XML and render it. Now, I don't want to pretend that what you would do to go see your list of songs is get in Visual Studio and do all this kind of stuff that we've been doing here. Visual Studio is a developer environment. If we were really deploying this, the XML and the translation and the schema would be put in an application. When somebody added records, the schema would be applied against it to see, do those CDs meet the requirements, and the style sheet would then render it maybe in a web page and that kind of thing. So realize that this is sort of the developer side of it, but it's the developer side getting enough of an output to see kind of what's going on. All right, so kind of a once through on XML. Till next time, ta-ta.